Good evening, Who Dat Nation. Happy Wednesday to our Bayou Blitz family. I hope everybody is doing well out there. For those of you like myself that are experiencing a deep freeze late in March, I hope you're staying warm. Spring, we think, is still coming, but we shall see. At the very least, if you're an NFL fan or a fan of the New Orleans Saints, you've had a pretty good week. And I am Bob Rose. I am one of your co-hosts of your Bayou Blitz podcast here to tell you all about it. And joining me to fill in the many blanks that I seem to often miss is Brendan Boylan. Happy Wednesday to you, Brendan.
Yeah, you too. I don't know. You fill in a lot of my blanks as well. I guess that's why we're a good team.
Right.
Speaking of good teams, just to throw it out there, because you guys know it's basketball season. I'm a basketball guy. How about the New Orleans Pelicans? Potentially finding themselves in like the fourth seed in the West right now, playing really good basketball. Zion Williamson has lost 25 pounds per reports. He's back in playing shape. So, knock on wood, but the Pels might make some noise for the first time in quite a while. So, to you guys down there in New Orleans that are season ticket holders or just fans, congrats. You guys have a really good and fun basketball team on your hands, hopefully for years to come. The Saints, on the other hand, we don't really know what's to come because, as I've like to continue to say, they are extending this window as far as they can push it. And it's weird because it's not a championship window. It's weird because it may not even be a NFC South title window because they haven't won that in a while either. Whatever this window that they think they are in, they're continuing to push it, trying to keep it open. Bob, they did that in a big way. This week, we were asked by a few of our viewers about our thoughts of Chase Young and his visit with the New Orleans Saints. I'm on record, if you guys want to go and find last week's episode, of saying I didn't think it was going to happen. I didn't think the Saints had enough money or ammunition to make it happen. More than anything, they were doing their due diligence. I was wrong. Bob was right. Yeah, Bob wrote a whole article about it, on how it was going to happen, potentially. And the Saints end up finding one of the bigger names on the defensive side of the ball in free agency. There may be some outside reasons for that, and we'll get into that. Some reports that came out today. But Bob, your initial thoughts with the New Orleans Saints landing yet another Ohio State Buckeye and a guy who's going to provide some pressure off the edge opposite Cam Jordan, we hope.
And we hope being the key phrase there. Brendan, I like the signing, and when I wrote the article about it for the Saints News Network, I mentioned how it could be a win-win scenario for both Chase Young and the New Orleans Saints. If indeed a deal came to fruition, I always believed it was probably going to be a one-year prove-it type of deal, and sure enough, that's what we got. But the win-win is this: if Chase Young has a good season, he now sets him up for a very lucrative long-term deal, be it with New Orleans or somebody else next year at this time on the free agent market. The win for the Saints is, he has flashed the potential of being a consistently disruptive pass rusher, which is exactly what the New Orleans Saints need. Depending on your perspective, if you felt offensive line was the number one need coming in, then edge rusher was number two. There were others that thought that offensive line was number two and edge rusher was number one. So you get the gist of how the majority of the Saints fan base and media and obviously team felt about the need at edge rusher. Now, do I believe Chase Young is the answer to that? Let's hope so, because the Saints certainly need somebody, as we saw last year, abysmally so. They need somebody to hurry quarterbacks into bad throws, put them on the ground, and just generally disrupt opposing offenses. But I submit this: Chase Young has been a very inconsistent player since his rookie year. Defensive rookie of the year back in 2020. Give him credit for that. 2021, 2022, he did next to nothing. Injuries playing a factor. His effort and work ethic was openly questioned by several. And I saw issues with that when I watched his film at Ohio State too, by the way. But in 2023, Chase Young got off to a very, very good start. Then Washington traded him to San Francisco for the stretch run, and he sort of plateaued a little bit. I'm not going to say disappeared, but he plateaued. So what kind of Chase Young is the New Orleans Saints getting? Do I believe that Chase Young is the answer to their edge rushing problems? Again, I don't know. And it would not surprise me at all if the Saints still selected an edge rusher. Probably not in the first round now, but maybe. It definitely wouldn't surprise me if they did so within the first day or two of the draft. And look at it this way, if the Saints felt that Chase Young was the answer to their edge rusher problems, they sure as hell would have offered him, more than just a 1-year contract, which is again what we're looking at. And as you alluded to, Brendan, you and I are going to talk, in a minute about some of the off the field, I'm not going to say problems, but question marks, that come along with Chase Young. But if he's healthy, on paper, our favorite saying at this show, on paper, it's certainly an upgrade for the New Orleans Saints defensive ends.
See, I don't know if I go as far as you to say the Saints could potentially draft a guy day one or day two at defensive end, or edge rusher, because what's the difference anymore? But I think if you go and you take a guy in the second round or even the third round, what does that say about how you feel about Isaiah Foskey? You spent a day 2 pick on last year. I bring the name up a lot, and I think it's just because there have been flashes, not consistent flashes, but there's been flashes with Peyton Turner. At this point, this year could be a win-win for both sides, New Orleans and Peyton Turner, whether he plays well or not. Mm-hmm. Right? It's a win-win for both sides because if Peyton Turner plays well, because like you alluded, Peyton Turner could get paid, the Saints could have their answer for the future. If Peyton Turner doesn't play well, it's a win-win because Saints get out of that situation and Peyton Turner can go elsewhere and try to do something with his NFL career. Now, injuries have played a big role in Peyton Turner's career to this point. And it seemed, at least the last 2 injuries, he was turning a corner, things were starting to click, and then he got hurt. Unfortunate, right? But best ability is availability. So I think a lot of it's going to depend on where the Saints feel they are with these other guys. Let's not forget Carl Granderson, who signed a massive extension last year. Where do the Saints feel about those guys? There's some youth here, there's some experience here, there's some new faces here. So there's a good blend of guys that are going to be competing for some spots there, and certainly competing for that rotation that you and I and Saints fans everywhere became accustomed to. That 7-man defensive line rotation for New Orleans, and each one of them could play a pivotal role, right? So there's that. When it comes to Chase Young, I've seen one highlight all over Twitter since the signing, and it is his sack in the Super Bowl. And people saying, well, if the Saints get this Chase Young, if the Saints, well, that's been the problem.
One play, right.
Right, but that's been the problem for however many years with Chase Young. With 3 years now, is we know he's capable of that. Right, we know he's capable of making really good offensive linemen look silly. And I'm going to make another basketball reference because I guess I'm in a basketball mood today. But there's an old saying with that I think is very comparable. And the saying goes, any good professional basketball player at any level can drop 25 points on any night. Right? You might be the worst offensive player in the league or the association, but you still have the capabilities and the ability of putting up 25 on anybody on any given night. Just like Chase Young has the ability to be a double-digit sack guy every single season. Does that mean he's going to be a double-digit sack guy every season? Well, so far in his NFL career, he has yet to do that,
Right.
right? We brought him up last week. I'll bring him up again. He signed a contract recently, too. Jadeveon Clowney, right? Another example of a guy who is capable of here, but are you going to consistently get that? Or are you going to get the flash in the pan, the 3 games out of a year where he really shows up? And again, to go back to that comparison I just made, or is it going to be a guy who scores 25 points in a basketball game 7 out of the 82 games in a year? Right? Everybody knows the ability's there. The talent level is there. But that's the difference between good, not even just good to great players, Bob, but good players to Pro Bowl players.
Mhm.
The difference from Pro Bowl players to all pro players to future Hall of Famers, it's that. It is the consistency aspect of it. I think Chase Young has the ability. I really liked some of his comments about working with Cameron Jordan. I think he had high praise for Cameron Jordan, which also proves that 99% of this league has high praise for Cameron Jordan. And for you guys that are a little iffy on Cam right now, he's a future Hall of Famer. He's at the bitter end of his career. More than likely going to retire a Saint. We all love that. But we can't expect Cam to go and get 12 sacks a year anymore, right? We know what the expectation is for Cam Jordan now. And to have a guy that is still young, that has those flash of the pan moments and the talent of Chase Young is going to be a great compliment. And maybe we see a little bit more of Cameron Jordan,
Yeah.
Stacking up sacks next year because teams don't have to double team him.
Mhm.
Triple team him at times. Double team him with a back coming out of the backfield and giving him a little nudge. Some of that attention will go away.
And he's not going to have to play 85% of the defensive snaps either if Chase Young works out, if Peyton Turner stays healthy, if Isaiah Foskey develops. I know that's a lot of ifs, but that's kind of what the Saints are banking on right now. In my opinion, Cam Jordan at this stage of his career is better suited towards a situational role, probably as a pass rusher, or when you need a key stop, on third downs or on a specific drive. Cam can still play the run very well. But yeah, he's also gonna be 35. He's coming into his 13th or 14th NFL season. That's a lot of wear and tear for a guy that's only missed 2 games in his entire career. It's time to let Cam, not make Cam, but let Cam take a little bit of a backseat, and you use him when you need him most more. And to your point, I think Cam Jordan, again, if Peyton Turner stays on the field, if Isaiah Foskey develops, if Chase Young shows why he was the number 2 overall pick a couple years ago, then you're talking about one hell of a rotation. And now you bring in Cam, in the fourth quarter of a key game to get a sack, or during a defensive series when a stop is absolutely needed. Again, this is still a Hall of Fame player, not Saints Hall of Famer, NFL Hall of Famer. And I think he is going to be that much more effective with effective players around him.
I agree. Well, let's go into maybe why New Orleans was able to land Chase Young, because I certainly was a guy on the outside looking in thinking, I don't know if this is going to happen. Thinking Young's going to have plenty of suitors that will throw some money at him or find himself in a similar situation to what he was in last year with a team that could compete where he could really showcase his talents. Well, the news broke today in regards to how the contract breaks down. So we'll start there. According to our friend Nick Underhill, Chase Young's cap charge this year is just under $3.5 million. So the Saints get a little bit of a steal there based off of how these things and the initial reports kind of came out about the length and the money situation when it comes to the contracts. But we know the Saints are good at what? Saints are good at maneuvering those things around. So the Saints should have about $11 to $12 million left in spending money in terms of cap space. Now, the more important news. Here's some of the background on Chase Young's deal. Allegedly, the scans on his neck made it a little difficult for him to find a new home. There's a lot of teams that did not clear him on his physical, and this was initially found by doctors after he had a stinger last year in the preseason. He's actually scheduled for neck surgery tomorrow. So, Bob, it's a one-year deal. As you alluded to, the cap hit is about $3.5 million. I believe about $5 million guaranteed. But now we're talking neck injuries on a guy who's going to be playing in a very pivotal spot where you get hit a lot.
Yeah.
Surgery's coming tomorrow for the former number 2 overall pick. We like playing games on this show. So worried level 1 through 5. How worried are you about Chase Young?
1 being the least worried, 5 being the most worried. About 3.5, Brendan. Because neck surgery, even on a young man, and Chase Young's going to be only 25 next month. Neck surgery on any person is always a concerning ordeal, but especially when you play a professional sport, especially when you play a contact sport. We're hearing that Chase Young should be healthy and medically cleared by training camp. If that comes to fruition, obviously that's that's very good news. But how's it going to hold up long term? Now the Saints didn't, obviously, as we just mentioned, the Saints didn't ink him to a long-term deal. So they're sort of hedging their bets a little bit. But they signed the guy because they're counting on the guy for something. Neck surgery could potentially shelve him too. I mean, what if rehab goes wrong? We've seen that countless times in very recent seasons with New Orleans Saints players that have gone under the knife for one area of the body or another. And now you're talking about a neck. Neck injuries have shortened many an NFL and many a professional athlete career. So I'm a little bit encouraged because he's on the younger side. So as you know, my friend, you heal a hell of a lot faster than what I do. So I feel pretty good about Chase Young's chances, but for me to put him at a 1 or 2 scale of worry, no. There's too many, if you'll pardon the pun, moving parts here, to be concerned about. That we're in the gray area and will continue to be in the gray area. Probably well into the season until we find out how he holds up. So yeah, my worry level is probably about a 3.5 or 4.
To continue on some of the reports, $5 million guaranteed and about $8 million in per game roster bonuses. Yeah. This was to allow Young some time and to go through the rehab of the surgery and have a chance to make some money back. So the way this contract's worked out, it does really protect both Young and the Saints in a situation. With that, I still have a worry level. I'm going to put it right in the middle at about a 3. And my worry isn't so much about kind of what you alluded to. It's not really about the financial commitment to Young because it's a 1-year contract. My concern is more of how healthy is he actually going to be? Right? If it's a prove it deal, if it's a let's evaluate and see where Chase Young is and how he fits this team, can you effectively do that if he's not 100%?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And even with 3 to 5 months after a neck surgery, you might be 80%. You might be 90%. You might be 60%. At 60%, I hope he's not playing at all. But you guys get where I'm going with all of this. He may only be 85% when week 1 rolls around, when the preseason rolls around. Can you get an accurate read of how a guy is going to suit and fit with your team if he's only there? And all of that tied in with the accusations, a really aggressive word. I'm going to try to think of a better word. With the questions of his motor and the questions of his desire to give it 100% on every play, tie that in with a guy who might not be 100%.
Yep.
How can you correctly evaluate a situation?
Yep.
Now, Chase has a lot to prove. He has a lot to prove in terms of, well, former number 2 pick, former rookie of the year. At 25 years old, you're looking to ink a good long-term 4 or 5 year contract after this, prove it deal with New Orleans. And then after that, maybe one more 4 or 5 year deal before you hit kind of your mid 30s and you're trying to ink a year or 2 contract with maybe a contender or whatever the case may be. And trust me, even at 25 years old, guys, think about that. How many more times do you have to get the bag?
Mm-hmm.
So I do think you're going to get the best out of Chase this year. You're going to get maybe the best effort you've ever seen on tape. But I don't know how healthy he's going to be. That's why I'm at a 3 in terms of concern level. And it's hard. It's hard. It's hard to have this kind of roller coaster of emotion of really excited you get a guy, like a well-known name guy, right? It's not one of those guys you hear about. He's like, oh, he's one of the best free agents. You're like, who is that? Like, you get a big name guy. And then the news breaks just a couple days later, he's having surgery on his neck. And you're like, yeah, I don't know. And it's like somebody hit the emergency stop button on the Six Flags ride. I don't know how we feel about that.
Yeah, and Saints fans have had PTSD, because of Peyton Turner, because of Marcus Davenport, So I don't blame some of them for starting to line up and take numbers on the Crescent City connection. Fortunately, like you said, Chase Young has a lot of money tied up, a good bit of money tied up in the amount of time he plays. And I'm sure there's additional incentives built in there, for certain statistical milestones too. So Chase Young has a reason, a financial reason to play and to play well. So I do agree with you. I think that if he is able to be on the field and is able to give 100%, and put up those numbers that everybody expects from a guy drafted number 2 overall, I think that he's going to do his best to do just that.
And we'll see. We'll see. Obviously, there's going to be a lot more to talk about as time progresses. And as we get closer to camp and we kind of know the condition of Chase Young, but I'm pretty thrilled for New Orleans to get a guy of that caliber, even if it's on a 1-year contract, because it could do wonders for where this team goes this year. And to bring up our favorite saying again, on paper, you look at this defense, not as many holes as there once was. It actually looks like a defense that could battle to be a top 10 and maybe even better type of a defense. Again, on paper. Let's talk about some of the other signings this week. There's more fun ones, but I want to start at quarterback. I'm not a ranter, but I think this one may qualify for a little bit of a rant from me. But the Saints signed Nathan Peterman to compete for the backup quarterback job with Jake Haener. I'm sure the Saints will bring in an undrafted rookie quarterback or some other person to be in the quarterback room come training camp. Bob Peterman is known for being a meme during his time with the Buffalo Bills, including a 5 interception game in Buffalo. He
5
was,
interceptions in 2 quarters, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, not even a full game. Thank you for reminding me of that. He backed up Derek Carr for a few seasons with the Oakland Raiders. Spent some time with some members of the Saints offensive staff when he was in Chicago. Bob, last week we talked about quarterbacks on the open market.
Yeah.
I don't believe Nate Peterman came out of either of our mouths. Because frankly, I think there were better options. So with that, before I get any further along, Bob, your reaction to Nathan Peterman joining the New Orleans Saints?
I laughed. I won't lie. When we last met at around this time last week, you asked me what my predictions were for the Saints free agency over the weekend. We disagreed on Chase Young. I had the team signing him. You didn't, as you already mentioned. I said that I thought the team would sign a veteran wide receiver, check, Cedric Wilson, and I thought the team would sign a backup quarterback with starting experience, check, ish. What I should have said was I hoped that the team would sign a backup quarterback with positive starting experience. That's where they missed that check mark big time. And like you said, I was aware that Nate Peterman was a free agent, but I didn't have him even written down on my free agent hit list. At the time they signed Nathan Peterman, Tyler Huntley was still available. Mason Rudolph was still available. Carson Wentz still available, still is. Joshua Dobbs still available. Jimmy Garoppolo, who we didn't think would become here anyway, but nonetheless still available. Ryan Tannehill, still available and still is. And they signed Nate Peterman. Now, predictably, most of Saints social media went into total outrage. Now the reason I wasn't outraged and I instead laughed hysterically, is mine won't turn to outrage unless Nate Peterman sees actual playing time during the regular season. Then at this point, you and I can start talking on the show. Hey, who are the Saints going to draft with the number 1 overall draft choice next year? But really, the Nathan Peterman signing tells me this. Yes, they wanted a veteran quarterback in that room, someone that knows the system, or at least the Saints coaches a little bit. And as you said, he did work with Andrew Giannocco, the quarterback's coach in Chicago. So at least there's that. But it also tells me that New Orleans has more faith in Jake Haener than what a lot of us others maybe either thought they did or what a lot of us have ourselves, only because of Haener's inexperience. Because I look at it this way: if Jake Haener cannot beat out Nathan Peterman for the number 2 quarterback job, then Jake Haener shouldn't be allowed to be collecting an NFL paycheck. Period and end of story. So that's the way I'm choosing to look at this. And as Alan Ulrich mentioned last night on the Under the Dome podcast, he likened it to a few years back when the Saints signed Tom Savage, to back up Drew Brees, and Savage played so poorly in the preseason, and I think that was the year that they brought in J.T. Barrett, the undrafted quarterback from Ohio State too. Barrett wasn't playing well. Savage was playing horribly, and the Saints responded by going out and trading for Teddy Bridgewater before the eve of the season. I love that comparison made by Allen. Savage, Peterman, similar quarterbacks in the way that they aren't guys that you want to take the field at any point in time. Haener is a younger guy, a guy that they hope develops, a guy that, again, based off of what I just said, they obviously have some confidence in. Now, if Haener plays poorly in the preseason and Peterman does what Peterman does, then the Saints might have to hit the panic button a little bit, and maybe force a trade, for somebody else, of a Teddy Bridgewater type, a Joe Flacco or Ryan Tannehill if they're still available, people like that. But again, I'm not outraged at the signing, because it tells me that they have a little bit more faith in Jake Haener than what we thought they might.
Mm. I laughed a little bit, and at first it was like a ha-ha laugh, and then it turned into like a laugh of concern, like the nervous laugh, like ha ha that's kind of where I was at, 'cause I was thinking, what? Like, this is a guy who got cut by the Bears 3 separate times last year. And I know he came back to practice squad and elevations, and I know there's a system to all of it, but he was cut 3 times last year. So I'm thinking, okay, well, and then like you said, Bob, you go through the quarterbacks that were still available at that time, and you go, okay, um, okay. Now, with that said, and I will throw it out there because it was thrown out there. There are reports, I cannot confirm them. Bob, you might be able to. There were reports that the Saints had offered Pittsburgh a day 3 pick for Kenny Pickett. Again, I don't have any sources to confirm that. I know that that was floating around there. I know there were Saints fans that were frustrated that the Saints didn't make an offer for Justin Fields. But in a way, I think Chicago was trying to do Fields right for the situation that he dealt with for the 3 or 4 years he was there. And they put him in a position where he could find himself starting again very soon, depending on the play, health, and age of Russell Wilson in Pittsburgh. I'm a little confused by the Peterman signing. I mean, I get that there's a relationship, familiarity between him and Derek Carr. And if you guys are new to the show or new to being a Saints fan, welcome. Dennis Allen and Derek Carr are trying to think of PG ways of saying this.
Laurel and Hardy, Abbott and Costello.
That's good. That's sure, yeah, I guess. But Carr kind of gets what he wants, right? Carr is the favorite child of Dennis Allen. And if Carr went, I really enjoyed my time with Nate back there in Oakland / Las Vegas. The first thing Dennis is doing is like, oh my God, guys, did you hear that? Like, did you hear that? Derek really likes Nate Peterman. What's Nate Peterman doing? And with no questions asked. So I get that. I get the familiarity with the system. If you want to say that, again, cut 3 times last year. But I do think it says something about Jake Haener. Like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if the Saints bring in another quarterback.
Yeah.
Before training camp starts, or if they make a trade during the preseason to bring in somebody else. And when I say another quarterback, I don't mean like another veteran quarterback. I mean very literally like an undrafted free agent quarterback that will likely not make the team, that somebody falls in love with. Kind of like Hard Knocks. Hard Knocks every year has like a 4th quarterback that becomes the star of the show, like a guy like that. Or they call Ian Book and see what he's doing. But I digress. I think it's laughable because I think New Orleans had a really good opportunity to bring in a quarterback that would provide value to the team past playing on the field. I think Nate Peterman, with his experience in the league, does do a little bit of that. But if this season were to go south, Bob, and go south early, last year you had chance for Jameis Winston.
Mm-hmm.
Congratulations to Jameis for him signing with the Browns, and an excellent video posted today thanking New Orleans. Always got love for Jameis. But if the season goes south, I don't see anybody in the Superdome chanting like Peterman, Peterman, which gives Derek Carr a hell of a lot of job security. That scares me a lot. And I think ultimately that's what frustrated me about the signing more than anything is because at least with Jameis in the room, there was some maybe not true competition, but there was a sense of competition. There was a sense of when Jameis almost led the comeback over the Vikings.
Mhm.
We were chatting. All of us were chatting. You were writing. We were chatting. You were writing. Saints News, everybody was writing about Carr's injury and how Winston could be the quarterback, not for next week, but there were conversations about Winston being a quarterback for like the foreseeable future to give Carr time to recover. Now, Carr ended up coming back the very next week. Say what you will about that. Say what you will about Dennis Allen's relationship with Jameis. That's all in the rear view. But at least there was a sense of my job is not safe if I get hurt, if I don't play well, if the boo birds come out yet again. You don't really have that with Nate Peterman. You don't even have that with Jake Haener. That's what scares me. Power over an organization can be a very it's like a catch-22 type of a thing. And I think Dennis Allen right now has a little bit too much freedom or power here over a unit of the field that he's never really oversaw, and putting a lot of faith in a quarterback who was booed by his home fans multiple times throughout last season. I'm not ready to throw in the towel on Derek Carr by any means. And he played, and I'll say this again, this is no shade on Derek Carr, what I'm saying. He played really well in the back half of the year. Those last 8 games, really good football from Derek Carr. But to find yourselves in a situation where Dennis Allen's job's on the line, frankly, the way the contract works, Derek Carr's contract, like time with the team, would be on the line. So not bringing any competition baffles me, because I don't care who you are. I don't care if you've been to a Pro Bowl. I don't care if you're a future Hall of Famer. Competition is the best thing for a football team, or any team for that matter. Hall of Fame head coach Bob Rose can talk all about that with his Hall of Fame resume. Competition is great for everybody, and this is the lack thereof. And it almost makes people get comfortable. And the more comfortable you are, the worse things can get in a sense. So I know it's a new team in terms of the offense, like offensive coaching staff. I get it. Trying to make sure everybody's comfortable. I get it. But sometimes when you attempt to make things so easy, or you attempt to make a transition that easy and gentle, it ends up getting a lot harder than you think. That's where my fear is. That's why I did not like the Peterman signing. I don't care that he's 1-3 in his 4 career. I'm sorry, 1-5 in his 1-4 in his 5 career starts, and has thrown 13 picks to 4 touchdowns. I don't care about that. I care about the fact that of everything I just said about now there being a comfortableness to everything. And that's that.
To address the Kenny Pickett rumor, and that's all there ever was a rumor. It was thrown out there by Andrew Filipponi, I'm using hard air quotes now, media member that works for 93.7 The Fan up in Pittsburgh, PA. Filipponi is closer to a shock jock than an actual member of the media. He covers ish the Steelers, but Filipponi, and Pony and I have had a little bit of a run-in on Twitter once or twice before. I'll throw that out there. So I don't mean to make this personal, but I am stating fact when I say that Andrew Filipponi on several occasions, has said things with zero sources and were basically just unfounded rumors or opinion that he put out there as news. Because I'll put it this way. If Filipponi was right about the Saints at least showing interest in Kenny Pickett, which, by the way, the Saints were interested in Pickett a couple years ago when Pittsburgh did draft him. New Orleans ultimately passed on him. Pittsburgh had the opportunity to draft him and obviously did so. So, I mean, yeah, there was initial interest there way back when by the Saints. But if there was interest now in trading for Kenny Pickett, how come Andrew Filipponi is the only one, literally the only one that said it? No other Pittsburgh Steelers sources, legitimate news sources, have said it. And no New Orleans Saints news sources, including us at the Saints News Network, have said it or have even heard about it. So that's what I'll say about Kenny Pickett. I don't believe that it was anything more than a single shock jock's opinion. And I don't believe that the Saints were ever in serious contention for Justin Fields either. I know I wrote an article about it at the beginning of the month, speculating why the Saints could go after Justin Fields, because I believe that the trade market for him would fall into to a conditional day 3 pick, which ultimately the Steelers traded what? A conditional 6th-round pick to get Justin Fields. But I never really thought the Saints were in serious contention for Fields either. I believe that they had their sights set on a guy like Nathan Peterman all along, to allow Derek Carr to feel comfortable and to show maybe a little bit of confidence in Jake Haener. That's the quarterback situation, folks. I know a lot of you hate it. I do. I get it. I see the comments every single time I post an article, even if it doesn't have anything to do with the quarterback position. And, oh, by the way, stop that, because it just shows a lack of intelligence. We get it. You hate Derek Carr. You hate Dennis Allen. You aren't the only ones. But guess what? Dennis Allen's your coach this year. Derek Carr's your quarterback. And the only other quarterback that might be added to the room would be if the Saints fall in love with a guy that might have fallen to them in day 3. Pratt from Tulane, Milton from Tennessee, Jordan Travis from Florida State, maybe one of those guys. But really, there's not going to be any sense of competition for Derek Carr this year. That's just the way it's going to be.
And the way that I look at all this, and again, you guys can dislike the head coach, dislike the quarterback. I think I was very vocal on where I stood last season at the quarterback spot. At the end of the day, it is what it is. And like Bob said, there is no competition for Carr this year. However, like I said, for both Dennis Allen and Derek Carr, their jobs are on the line. And Carr's contract, and we'll get into this more during the season, especially if it goes south. Carr's contract, I mean, it makes it really easy for the Saints to get off of after this year, if they want to. And we'll get into more draft talk. I think Jordan Travis is a really interesting prospect, even with the injury, because you know what any team could do? They could play the old IR game. You don't want to cut somebody, so you just magically throw them on IR.
Yep.
Jordan Travis has a legit reason to be on IR. So,
yeah. And I love that kid's game too, by the way. I would not be angry at all with a fifth might be too high, a 6th or 7th round pick if Jordan Travis fell that far. I would not be angry at all.
Yeah, why not? I saw in the comments, I'll say it too, 6th for Justin Fields is crazy. In my opinion, I like Justin Fields a lot. I think he brings value to a team. I don't know if he is the centerpiece of a team that's going to go win a lot of games, but in terms of being a solid quarterback that brings, and again, you guys know how I feel about this. The Saints have never had a mobile quarterback during my time covering the team, because it was Drew Brees and then this sling of other quarterbacks and now Derek Carr. I would love it. Like those, well, how many games was it with Taysom? 5 one year and then 4 the next, so 9 total games. It was fun. It was different. I didn't know, I didn't look at 3rd down and go, man, he's going to drop back to pass. I just want some I just want to be kept on my toes sometimes. But I digress, Bob. We have some other signings to get into before we get into dot or drop and all that good stuff. Bob, you predicted a receiver. The Saints end up with two. One of them, a Louisiana native. What can you tell us about the newest members of the New Orleans Saints wide receivers corps?
Well, let's start with the homeboy signing. Stanley Morgan Jr., most recently of the Cincinnati Bengals. I remember watching his film. He played collegiately at Nebraska. I remember watching his film way back when I was with John Hendricks, working for John Hendricks at Canal Street Chronicles. And I won't lie, I like Morgan. Very fast player, competitive guy. Coming out of Nebraska, he really didn't run and was never asked to run a full route tree, and has never developed as a receiver at the NFL level. Therefore, I think probably the best hope for Stanley Morgan is to crack the roster as like a fifth receiver or a sixth guy that is active some weeks, deactivated others. But he's a special teams guy. More than just a potential kick returner as relief for Rashid Shaheed. He's a gunner too. The Saints lost some special teams guys. This free agency. Lonnie Johnson gone. Zach Bond gone. Isaac Yiadom gone. Nefi Sewell not going to be ready for the start of the regular season because of injury. Ty Summers probably on the roster bubble at best. So the Saints are going to sign these ugly, these under the radar special teams guys because they need them. Again, I wouldn't expect much in the way of receiving from Stanley Morgan Jr., but I get the signing. Now Cedric Wilson, on the other hand, last couple of years for the Dolphins, kind of parlayed. If he spent his first 3 years with the Cowboys, and that third year with Dallas, he had a pretty big year, for a complimentary wide receiver, which allowed him to parlay that into a bigger, fairly big contract with the Dolphins. Well, Miami has a boatload of running backs: Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. There's only so many footballs to go around, and therefore Cedric Wilson didn't put up a lot of numbers in Miami's offense. Having said that, he played for Coach McDaniel in Miami. Coach McDaniel came from San Francisco as the offensive coordinator under Kyle Shanahan. A very similar system to the type of system we believe that Clint Kubiak is going to run in New Orleans. So in other words, Cedric Wilson, who can play both outside and the slot, by the way, Cedric Wilson pretty much knows the system that he's stepping into. And if you're talking as a number 3, number 4 guy, I think you could do a lot worse than Cedric Wilson. And really the Saints had to sign wide receivers and are not done adding them, by the way, because entering free agency, they only had 3 under contract. Olave, Shaheed, and A.T. Perry. Now, those are 3 pretty darn good wide receivers. So you don't necessarily need a star, but you certainly need to fill out your depth chart, and you certainly need training camp competition. Cedric Wilson, as it stands right now, if the season started today, they obviously only have 5 wide receivers. Cedric's probably going to be competing with A.T. Perry for that 3-4 spot. Assuming Rashid Shaheed's going to get a lot of the number 2 reps. I kind of like that receiving core. I wouldn't be against or opposed to the Saints adding another wideout, in day 2 or maybe an early day 3 of the draft. But if they don't, I think Cedric Wilson is going to add a lot more to this offense than what people think.
Remember this too. Remember the slew of receivers the Saints signed last year? I could very well see it happening again, especially under a new offense where Kubiak's going to be able to come in and say, and we compared him to waves and phases of free agency. As we get to the latter parts of it, I mean, Kubiak could very well be like, well, that guy's still available. I worked with him. Let's give him a training camp invite. Or I worked with that guy, or that guy intrigues me. Or, hey, Hunter Renfro's still out there. Oh, did I say that out loud?
You did.
Hunter Renfro's still out there, so let's see what he's got. So I'm not going to be – it's not even not going to be surprised. I can guarantee as a betting person sometimes, depending on who you ask and who I'm with. That hey, it's going to happen, right? The Saints are going to bring in more wideouts. So, I think Wilson's an interesting ad for all the reasons you mentioned. I think that you could do worse. I think you could do a little better if he's going to be receiver 4. I think that also speaks really highly to how both of us feel about A.T. Perry and the jump that he can make in year 2. But I wouldn't call Wilson a guaranteed roster guy either. So don't get that in your heads by any means. I think that there is still going to be a lot of competition at that position for New Orleans. Speaking about competition, the Saints brought in a position that is becoming more and more popular over the last, couple years in New Orleans, and that is versatile offensive lineman. Guys that can play multiple spots, which is a really hard thing to do. And Bob and I have mentioned that. Now, a lot of times when you see guard/tackle, that means it's one particular side. It's not like they can play left guard and left tackle and right guard and right tackle. It's typically, hey, you play on the right or you play on the left side. But they bring in another guy who is a tackle/guard, very similar to James Hurst. Bob, what do we know about the former Minnesota Viking?
Oli Udoh, I know he is a large young man. 6'6", 320. Drafted as a tackle by the Minnesota Vikings. But during his time there, now he missed all but 2 games last year because of a quad injury. I think it was a quad, might have been a pec, but he missed all but 2 games because of injury last year. Even though he started out with the Vikings as a tackle, 2 years ago, he started 16 to 17 games at right guard. So we know that he's versatile. And as you pointed out, he's played both tackle spots. He's played both guard spots. And for the first 3 years of his career, offensive coaches on the Minnesota coaching staff, Clint Kubiak, Rick Dennison. Rick Dennison also, you guys, we talk about Kubiak every single week. I'm one of the few that talk so glowingly about Rick Dennison, but Dennison is the run game coordinator. In other words, this young man knows the offensive blocking system that Dennison and Kubiak want to run. I think that's key. And you compared him to James Hurst. Someone last night compared him to Senio Clemente. A couple years back. As Drew Brees was winding down his career. That's another guy that was able to play multiple spots, and do so pretty effectively as long as he wasn't asked to be a long-term starter. I think that's what kind of offensive lineman this guy is. I still look at offensive line as a need, as a very big need heading into the draft. But if you're looking to strengthen depth, and this is a team that Andrus Peat has not been re-signed. Max Garcia, the human turnstile, has not been re-signed. Trey Turner has not been re-signed. We still don't know what we have out of Nick Saldivari. We still don't know if Trevor Penning is going to develop. And Ryan Ramczyk has a degenerative knee problem. Offensive line depth is a key. And I think a versatile lineman does the trick just fine.
And I've seen a lot more mocks have the Saints taking a tackle at 14. I wouldn't be surprised there either. But we have plenty of time to talk about the draft. I say plenty of time. It's really like in a month, isn't it? So
yeah.
Plenty of time, yes and no. Perhaps. Not sure. Not sure how we're going to go about that. But, Bob, let's move on to dot or drop before we say goodbye to our folks for another week and a day, probably, because I will be traveling. As I mentioned, I will be going all the way up to Michigan. So I don't know if I'll be back Wednesday or not. Especially when you drive, you never really know. Some of our friends here in the chat know all about driving, whether it's your own personal vehicle or trucking. So you guys know exactly how that goes. Sometimes you never know when you're going to get back. But with all of that said, Bob, dot or drop? Trying to think of a position we didn't talk about a whole lot tonight. Dot or drop? the Saints make another splash or surprise type of signing with the $12 or $13 million they have left in cap.
Drop.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Drop. The Saints are going to add more players. We talked about wide receiver depth. I mentioned that I expect the team, to add more pieces focused on the special teams unit specifically. But I don't expect them to add another big name. So no, I'll drop that. There'll be some depth signings, some players to help on special teams and to fill out spots on the depth chart, but nobody that's going to make the Eeyores of Who Dat Nation say, "Oh my God, I've changed my opinion. This is a great offseason." No, unfortunately, Eeyore is going to be Eeyore, and there are not going to be any moves that are going to change their minds.
Yeah, and I think to your point, I think there's going to be a lot of depth guys. There might be a depth guy that the Saints get that surprises people.
Sure.
But in terms of like a big name splash type of guy, I'm with you.
Dot or drop? I wrote an article, one of my draft profiles I published today on Brock Bowers, the tight end from Georgia. And this is more of a multiple choice than a dot or drop for you, Brendan. Brock Bowers falls to 14. Unlikely, but could happen. Romeo Odunze, the wide receiver from Washington, falls to 14. So those two are available. And 2 of your 3 offensive tackles are available. So in other words, you have your pick there. What position you go? You fill your tight end, you fill your wide receiver, or you fill your offensive tackle at 14?
I'm really biased here, but Brock Bowers is going to be my selection because of multiple reasons. One, I really do think you guys remember the Kyle Pitts hype and how Kyle Pitts hasn't really lived up to that hype. I do think Brock Bowers is going to be a guy that lives up to the Brock Bowers hype. He's a phenomenal football player. You can look at the numbers if you're a stats person, or you can just watch the tape and see the difference it made when he was and was not on the field for the Georgia Bulldogs this year, and how that kind of changed how they ran their offense and how effective they were. I think it's difficult to find a quote-unquote generational tight end, and I do think that he fits the billing. Now, the rest of it's completely up to Brock Bowers and where he lands. There's a lot of things there. Sometimes you don't land in the best spot for you, but looking at the New Orleans offense and what Kubiak does and Kubiak's successes with tight ends in his career, I think Bowers would be kind of like a dream fit. Now, with that, too, taking a receiver at 14 to me, regardless of who it is, because let's be honest, Marvin Harrison Jr. is not falling all the way down to 14.
Right.
That might be the exception. But you already have your receiver of the future. You have a little bit of a joker player out there in Shaheed. When it comes to tackle, yes, it's a need. But I think the Saints could, I don't want to say get away with it, but I have confidence in James Hurst starting on the left side if he has to at this point. I think Bowers is like a can't miss type of prospect, and that's why I'd take him there. All right. We kind of talked about it, Bob, but dot or drop, the Saints bring in another veteran quarterback before the end of preseason.
Before the end of preseason or before training camp?
Before the end of preseason. Made that a little more difficult on
you. You did. Before the end of preseason, I'm going to speculate and I'm going to say dot. Because we only know Nathan Peterman to do Nathan Peterman things. And while I like Jake Haener, I am not certain. Yeah, he's now. We were already, questioning his inexperience, worried about his inexperience, and now he's going to be trying to digest his second offensive system in 2 years. I am not sure we're going to be able to say that Jake Haener is going to be able to show the development he needs to show, to really make the Saints feel confident, if he has to step in for an injured Derek Carr. So I do think, that the Saints will attempt to bring it, another fairly accomplished veteran quarterback before the end of preseason. I'll dot that.
Oh, I mean, I'll throw it out there too because I've thrown out his name a couple times over the years. But and I guess this is another thing that frustrates me about the Peterman situation. And like Fields and Pickett are good examples of guys that were high draft picks that didn't work out. Like, how about Malik Willis, the quarterback out of Liberty a few years ago, who was just buried on the Titans depth chart now? Like, you tell me you wouldn't take a flyer on that before you take a flyer, but it's completely a different conversation.
Yeah.
Bob, hit me.
All right, dot or drop. As we all know, the Saints released Marcus May, showing faith in Jordan Howden, a young rookie last year who showed some promise. Tyrann Mathieu is still there. They also, within the last 48 hours, they re-signed Hugo Amadi and re-signed Jonathan Abram. So, Brendan, your safety depth chart now looks like this: Tyrann Mathieu, Jordan Howden, Hugo Amadi, Jonathan Abram. Dot or drop. The Saints need to add another safety, another at least number 3 safety, either through free agency, or up through the middle rounds of the draft. Dot or drop that one.
Yeah, I'm going to dot it. I think that anytime you have the ability to go and get someone with experience that is able to help a guy like Howden, who's young, has confidence, but sophomore slumps are a real thing. I think that's valuable because, or even Amadi being a younger guy. Like Tyrann Mathieu, yes, but Jonathan Abram, also to the point of if someone were to get hurt, who do you really trust? Yeah, I think you do. I mean, I know he's been signed now, but Von Bell was like an interesting one if he would have actually hit the market. Not just because he's a former Saint, but because he kind of fits that mold now where he's not – you could get away with him not being your starter, right? You could have a guy who has starting experience who's not completely out of their prime yet. I think that's what the Saints target ultimately is a guy like that. And without having, the names in front of me, I couldn't throw a name out there at you guys. But you don't want a guy who's like super young and inexperienced. You already got 2 guys like that. You don't want a guy who's at like the very tail end of his career. You kind of want a guy like, what's a good example? I'm going to really pull into the bag of tricks here. Like Raphael Bush when he was in New Orleans. I know that is a pulling out of a guy like that who wasn't out of his prime yet, but had starting experience other places. Now he had to play a lot more because of how bad the defense was. But like a guy of that caliber, that age range, that's a guy you're looking for. Now, with all that, Bob, you've been busy this week writing articles, keeping track of things, giving out some previews on draft prospects. So for the people that have been missing out on that somehow, because it's literally been posted all over social media, people find your work as you fight off exhaustion and puppies.
Literally fight off both, and it's a losing battle right now. I'm getting my butt whipped and then some. But folks, you can follow me on Facebook, Bob Rose, ROSE. over on Twitter at BobbyR2613. All of my work, along with Kyle Mosley, Ross Jackson, and John Hendricks, all of us at the Saints News Network, at Saints News on Twitter, or the SI.com New Orleans Saints team page. Me specifically, all the draft analysis and film that I have been watching and promising you guys on, and filling up a notebook, and then some. I'm finally, now that free agency is wound down, the offensive coordinator has been hired, I'm able to publish these. So I've been doing so the last couple of days. I will continue to do so right up through the draft, both offense and defense. And folks, the last time I checked, there's more than one round to the draft. So you folks that are bitching and griping that so and so is never going to be a number one draft, first round draft choice. No, those are. I watched film on mid round guys, day two guys, even some late round prospects, from schools that I happen to like. So I have watched film on 130 prospects right now and counting. I am not going to have nearly enough time to publish draft profiles on all those, but as Brendan can attest to, when we get into day 2 and day 3 of our Bayou Blitz draft coverage, at least we have some notes to go by. So I do this for you guys, and it's my pleasure to do it, but it does wipe me out this time of year, and I'm going to get even more and more punchy, worse than usual, as we get close to the draft. But give a follow, make sure you read those articles also from John, Kyle, and Ross. We're going to give you, mock drafts, draft previews, positions of need, and otherwise. Make sure you give us all a follow.
Now, the real question is, you said 130 prospects so far. Now, how many of those are Gardner Webb running Bulldogs, Bob?
I'm sorry to say, Brendan, I have not watched any film on Gardner Webb this year.
I know the answer to that one. No hate to my alma mater, but I had to throw it out there. Now, if I were to ask small school North Carolina kids, you might have one or two. Maybe. I honestly have no idea if App has any guys this year, if Coastal has guys this year that you've already dug into. But those are two schools that have produced. And produced in the NFC South. Coastal had both Mike Tolbert and Josh Norman.
Yeah.
So gotta love the FCS. But they might not be FCS anymore. But anyway, I digress. For myself, you can follow me on virtually everything at BT Boylan. We're really excited for the draft, right? That's kind of when it all dates back. The reason that Bob and I even have this show now is because of some of the draft coverage we did 4-5 years ago together. So it's an exciting time of year for us. We're super excited to be hitting that as hard as we are. And we're looking forward to the rest of free agency as well. Well, guys, for Bob Rose, I'm Brendan Boylan. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Bayou Blitz podcast. We will be back next Thursday for another edition. And good news for you guys, starting sometime in April, we're not going to be able to move this thing a whole lot because of schedule. So it's going to be pretty strict to Wednesday nights, but we thank you guys for bearing with us in the meantime. So until next Thursday, find some peace, spread love, practice positivity. We'll see you next week for another edition of the Bayou Blitz. See you then.